Alright, another graph physics video presentation. Alright, two slit stuff. Exclusively, hopefully. And just a summation of the arguments related to a comment. And we'll go through it and point out how this really shouldn't be a dispute between reasonable human beings. And that you're the people being unreasonable. You doubters and naysayers and liars, frankly. So let's go through it. So Skyrim says, wave theory does predict the double-slit pattern. No, it doesn't. Okay, so let's understand the double-slit pattern is the one on the bottom here of those two patterns. And so it's a bunch of dots and then all of a sudden nothing, and then a bunch of dots and then nothing, and then a bunch of dots and nothing. And so there is no way, okay, to draw, okay, the pattern. So if I just put 4, it can be any number of dots. You know, it just depends on whether you have a perfectly symmetrical, yeah, you can see that. All right. So that's the pattern you're after. And the wave theory, okay, basically is arguing, let's put it as centered as possible, that there are two waves created by the double slit. This is what they say. Now, you know, you're going to deny what they say? Fine. I'm saying that's just a terrible thing to do. So the idea is if a single photon goes in, I would argue the single photon is actually a ray, and it has a length, and you know, it has lots of features that they ignore. It has polarization. So it has a bunch of, well, you can't really see that. It has polarization. You know, it has a width, it has a length, it has a structure that they ignore because they pretend the single photon is doing this. And actually the single photon, every single photon is actually going to Pluto, it's going to the moon, it's going everywhere, and it decides, though, I'm only going here, really. That's what they believe. All right, they draw a single photon as this, you know, but when they draw it going in, see, it's a big giant arc. So all you have is straight lines because the arcs are so big. The photon is so ginormous that this is how they draw the photon. So they say a single photon is this monstrous, huge thing or something. And it hits this thing and somehow it makes two waves. The single photon, we know, is small. Somehow makes this gigantic, goes through both slits somehow. So the single photon goes through both slits and makes these two waves. Now, these two waves interfering with each other will not, in fact, in definite, absolute, provable, you know, stake your life on it, go to, you know, the electric chair if I'm wrong, kind of fact, okay, in spite of what Bubba says here. This will, in fact, not create this pattern. What he'll say is there should be something here. Okay, let's draw it solid. This one's missing. This one's missing. All right. Why are they missing? Where does this account for this and this? Oh, that's right. It doesn't account for it in any way whatsoever. You can't draw it. So draw me a picture of how your wave theory explains this missing bit here and this missing bits here. Show me the drawing of your geometry. This is all just geometry, right? I mean, the wave equation is just a geometric equation. Sine theta, okay, is just an angle for a line, okay, an angle for a line. And then you have an angle from here, and you just say, are they in phase or out of phase? That is, is their alignment phase-wise consistent when they reach this point? And then you'd have a spot here. But there's no spot. Again, it's missing. All right, no explanation. They have nothing. All right, so his opening line is just fraud. He just says it. He doesn't have any evidence of it. He doesn't have any way to show us any physical mechanics that explains this or this. No physics to explain it. It's not consistent with their theory. This is their theory. Now, Richard Feynman said right to their face, forget all this crap. Okay, forget this wave interference crap, because it's wrong. Okay, it doesn't really work. And he told you God does play dice with the universe. He said, if you don't like it, tough. That was his response. You don't like my silly answer. That, guess what? The photon just randomly decides to go in some direction. So anytime there's a slit or a something, it just randomly chooses a direction. That's his explanation. And it's probabilistic. It's not really random, in the sense that, no, there's a probability he'll hit here. It's a probability he'll hit here. Probability he'll hit here. And that God is playing the dice. God is telling it to be here, and to be here, and to be here. That's Feynman's answer, right? One of the grandfathers of their physics, who basically was saying, oh yeah, we might as well believe in God. All right, I'm being sarcastic, but that is the truth. The truth this guy ignores. Okay, so wave theory does predict the double-slit pattern. No, it doesn't. But since you keep denying that, I'm denying that that's true. Yes. I don't think you have any evidence that that's true. It's not consistent with any of your physics theories. There's no lecturer explaining how it happens. Lewin doesn't draw a picture of it. As I pointed out when I showed the Lewin clip, he just ignored it. He just said, look, photon, light plus light equals dark. On, off. Continuing. He didn't account for it at all. It was right there on the screen, and he pretended there was no empty spot there. So don't tell me your theory predicts it. Don't tell me you have evidence, because you don't. All right. Let's try something else. Yeah, well, you just, produce more fake arguments, right? Is that going to be the something else? More fake arguments from, we did do the detector experiment. No, you didn't. So again, why don't, I keep asking, show me the video on YouTube that's accurate. Show me a description of the two-slit experiment on YouTube by any physicist that actually draws the right picture. One that makes sense. Okay. Huygens. The theory that they only apply when they want to. Yeah, it's a fact, but we can't use it all the time because it doesn't work. All right. Showing that the wave model of light doesn't work would also show that most of modern physics is wrong. Well, what is most of modern physics? Yes, that's sort of my assertion. I'm pointing it out. Bent space is a vacuous answer to why something happens. Or the nothing tells us something what to do. Well, that's a big zero. Entanglement? Yeah, absolute crap. Dark matter, dark energy, special stuff that only does one thing and it disobeys all the other laws we know for matter. Photons being bent twice as much by gravity by the magical we need it to theory. So all of physics is really crap. It's really, really bad science. That's the claim, yes. All right. Okay, this would not just get you a Nobel Prize. Well, that's sort of my argument. Quite obviously, I've unified physics in my opinion. I've come up with an explanation that's perfectly rational and reasonable and simple. And it just defeats all your wooey physics. It all goes away because it's all unnecessary. All your antiparticles and all your misidentifications all goes away. We don't have to have neutrinos and plutinos and tau photies and doody-dotty-dotty and a wacky particle and the silly quark and the brain dead quark and the strange quark. We don't have to have any of your little strangeness and your little wooey physics anymore. But it would essentially give you the same status as a living Jesus. Yeah, well, you gave Einstein that status and he didn't frankly deserve it. So you're really good at doing this idol worship crap. It's really not about worshiping idols. It's about the fact that you've been wrong before in the past. It's demonstrated through history, and you're making all these declarations, these wacky, extraordinary claims, and you won't even produce ordinary evidence. The Eddington experiment, glaring example. You've drawn this conclusion. You've written it in the rock. And your evidence absolutely sucks. I've been saying since day one, 10 years ago, that this is about the fact that you have incredibly weak evidence for an extraordinarily wacky theory. And that is the anti-scientific method. If you want to describe what the anti-scientific method looks like, that's what it looks like. That's the UFO method. Believe it, just believe. Wish them into existence. It's all wishy-washy physics. So it's really not about comparing me to religious figures. As I said, I didn't do anything extraordinary. All I did was say, man, your physics sounds like a religion. There's got to be a better answer. Oh, the photon goes in and it goes through both slits by some sort of magic. And then it has radar and it talks to each other and they figure out where to go. It's a silly answer to the question of why there's a pattern on the wall. It was a silly answer. I figured out it was a silly answer. There has to be a better answer, so I looked for the better answer and I found it. That's the simple truth. No Jesus involved. No fantasy character needed. Anyway, I believe this would interest you since you clearly want to influence the world. Well, I want to influence the world in a lot of ways in terms of being rational and reasonable. But you're just a gang and a mob. And the sad truth is, even if I ever acquire influence, it won't be for the right reason. It won't be because you people understand anything. It'll just because you did this idol worship. All you're looking for is idols to pray to and idols to follow. You're pathetic. And you think you're smart. You're a little elitist pile of, your little frickin' pocket-protecting, nerdy little world that you live in where you're all so much better than everybody else. Because what? You can figure out not to stick your fingers in your anus before you eat dinner? All right. I believe that this would interest you, so yes, influence the world. Follow these instructions. Oh, you're not just an arrogant little putz, are you? No, not at all. Anyway, buy a laser. Waste of time. I already have 6. A double slit and screen, the length scale of your choice. Obviously, you can just improvise all these things. So these are all things I've done in videos. I have a playlist called 2 Slits you couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to. I've made single slit patterns with more than 60 bars in them. More than 60. Yeah. So I don't need to do that. What's under dispute is not the shape of the pattern. Okay, it's right down there, right? This is like the best image I've ever seen of the patterns. It's right there. It's not in dispute. You would agree, right? We're not disagreeing about, well, the top one is the single slit pattern of a width this size, let's say, and the bottom one is 2 of exactly the same width, with the single impediment being the same width also. And that's what you'll get. So is that under dispute? No, that's not under dispute. So I don't need to do the experiment again, because I've already done it, and I've seen it done hundreds of times by hundreds of different people. So your advice sucks. So yeah, that's sort of what I'm saying. So number 1 would be a waste of my time. All right. 2, predict the positions of bright and dark spots using your model. Yes, I did that. I'll do it again in this video, but I'll read a little more first just to see if there's something else that needs to be clarified. Okay. Do the same as 2, but using the standard physics model. Well, I just did that. See, this is their standard model. Their standard model is that light is a wave and that it's interfering in space. The photons are interfering in space. Well, there's no way to draw that and make this 2-slit pattern. It doesn't work. And with the single slit, it's even more ludicrous in the sense that they have a single opening and they make 2 waves. They say, Huygens makes 2 waves by magic. Not because there's any reasoning behind it. Well, all the waves cancel except for the 2 I need. See, I make all of the other ones cancel except the 2 that I want. So it's a mindless pile of drivel as an argument. So yes, the wave function doesn't work. Clearly in the single slit in water, there is no diffraction. pattern, right? They call it a different pattern because they can't really, they just don't have the courage to say interference pattern when it's one wave. But anyway, there is no interference pattern in water in the single slit, clearly. Clearly there is in light. Clearly the two aren't consistent. There is no reason to go, it seems like, because it doesn't seem like at all. And clearly water waves don't do this. It doesn't happen. So this water wave mechanics of this dopey idea that there's an ether and the ether is waving is wrong. Demonstrably wrong. Now I've pointed out how the radar experiment, you just do a subtle change to it and you'll see the waves never have a chance to interfere with each other. There is no wave interference explanation that works. The photons are never near each other. They can't possibly interfere with each other. This whole notion that photons bang into each other in space and decide to go somewhere is wrong. It's unimaginable mush. Forces do not interact with forces in any way you'll ever notice. And that's the fact. That's what the evidence indicates. Every single experiment indicates that is the truth. All right. By using the standard physics model, right? If you believe that is impossible, well, I can't draw it. Can you? Yes, I believe it's impossible to draw it because your theory is fundamentally wrong. Well, here, I might as well explain it now. And the trick is that you don't have to do much thinking to figure out what makes it wrong. You can know by looking at that pattern right below me, right there. You look at that pattern and you can see that these two overlap. And that what's really happening is there is two mechanisms that are creating the pattern. Well, I must have just wiped that out and redraw it. That would be fine with me, Gary. Okay, then that's what I'll do. All right, so here's the impediment, and here's your two slits. So if you think about it, what I realize, I've been calling it the surface experiment for a long time now because this is really about surfaces and the fact that surfaces are different than non-surfaces and that photons behave differently near surfaces. So I could take this single surface experiment. They have done this actually. But if you use really precise optics, you can shine light right against a single surface and you actually do get bar pattern here and bar pattern here. Now you can't see it, with the naked eye because first off, the pattern is really tight, okay? And secondly, there's too much light, so it all gets washed out. See, that's the problem with the single slit. When you have a single slit, right? Oh, it's a real problem because the pattern is going to tend to want to wash out just because you have all this light going right through the center, you see, and so that creates a whole brightness problem, blah blah blah. But anyway, don't want to get too sidetracked. So what your theory was is that you made these two waves and called this your distance, essentially, based on this distance. Okay, of this slit dictates this distance. So you just double this. So in your formula, you're basically see the center line in one stage of their mathematics. When they're doing the mathematics with a single slit, oh, this is a 1. And when they do the, mathematics for the double slit, they change this to a 0. So that means the next order is 1, here would be 2, right? After 1 is 2. And so essentially it ends up in the mathematics just doubling this distance in the math. So these are the two wave points. So these are the 2 points they're really doing the geometry for to figure out where there's full wavelength distance. So you're just basically saying that the lines, have these notches in them, right? And you're basically saying one line has to be a full notch bigger than the other line. Well, you can't quite see that. I could draw it this way. A full notch bigger, right? So the lines are coming this way. You get, if it's a half notch difference, right, then the two arrive at the wrong time, essentially. And so one of them's hitting and one of them's not, they're not going to hit at the right time, and therefore the frequency is broken. So they have to be in the right phase. That is, these lines all have to be the same. So it can have an extra full wavelength, but it can't have a half wavelength because that screws up the frequency. Okay, so you won't reconstruct a photon that way. So that's a consistent. We both believe this is about phase. All right, and so now really it's just about where these phase lines meet. And the problem with their theory is they're only using 2, and therefore they'll never account for this because it should be there by their math. So their math says it should be there. There should be one there. All right, but the key ingredient they're not getting right is there isn't 2 points. There's 4 points. The real places that this is happening is right here on these surfaces. And each one of these surfaces can send a photon straight. Now remember, this pattern's way far away, so these angles won't line up. And so from each one of these points, the photon can, any individual photon can go any one of these directions. Okay, any one of them are valid directions for the photon. So every single, so these 4 points are doing this. And all you're really going to do is add up to create the final result. You can sort of understand if there's a single photons, there's billions and billions of these photons. You know, a tiny bit of light is still a lot of photons. And so what you're really doing is you're just calculating the places that you can expect there to be in phase. Now, because we know this is the same, these two surfaces are the same distance as the slit opening. So you're seeing that right below. So you know that, let's get rid of this. Okay, so you know that these two distances, by their own math, will create a blob like this, and then a blob like this, and a blob like this. So these two distances create this pattern. That we could probably agree on. That's the mathematical truth. So the contributions from these two surfaces create this as a pattern. And then we know that these two surfaces, and this would be true if you could make a single slit this wide, and you can. See, the problem is a whole bunch. When you have, the wider you make the slit, the smaller you get these little lines, right? So we would also agree, I think, you would concede that if I did make a slit this dimension and this dimension, a single slit, that it would create this pattern. That is, the dot would be here. Okay, so this is the pattern. You'd get this distance between the little bits. If I made a single slit this distance, this is the pattern you would get right here. All right. You can see, oh, I can't see that arrow. Oh, I'll put the arrow over here then. All right, this is the pattern you'd get with these two slits, these two outside slits. So we could agree on that. Yeah, I don't think there's any way for you to disagree. So these two little things would be there. Okay, they would be there if it wasn't, if this was just one open slit. Now the problem was, if you did make this single slit, you wouldn't see them. Okay, because they get wiped out. You don't see any of these. You might see this much of the pattern. You'll see some dot, 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 dot here in the middle, but you won't see out here at all. Okay, because there isn't enough light compared to the amount of light that's deflecting can't overwhelm the amount of light that's going straight through. So it's just washing the pattern out, and so you don't see it. And there's just too few photons percentage-wise. See, the wider you make the slit, the weaker you make the laser. The laser has a, it has a beam width, right? So the wider I make the slit, the more of the outside of the beam I'm using instead of the inside of the beam. I'm not using the strongest light, I'm using the weakest light. So the wider I make the slit, all of the bending's happening on the fringe of the laser where I'm getting the weakest amount of pattern. So, but like I said, the truth is I did the experiment in my basement, and if you control the light enough, you can use a pretty wide slit, and you can see, like I said, I think I got up to like 70 of these little bits made visible. So anyway, I don't think there's any dispute that if I make the slit this width, this will be the spacing of the in-phase lines. That is, because these are longer lines, there are more places where you're a little wavelength, okay, a wavelength difference. So the longer you can make the lines, the smaller the lines get on the line, so to speak. So the tighter a full wavelength of distance change is. So you can make a full length of a full wavelength of distance becomes a smaller thing on the screen. So the wider the slit, the tighter the pattern, because you got a full wavelength of distance change. It happens more often. The longer your line, the more distance changes are possible. So that theory is indestructible. So again, I don't see how you can disagree with anything I've said so far. And so the simple truth is that there's 4 sources. You can do exactly the same math and just consider it 2 really, but you really don't have to worry about there's a third combination, right? There's this beam plus this beam. Well, I should have drawn them to the same location, huh? So you have another set of sources. But the point is what you really have is 4 sources for each location. And you can just understand it as those 4 sources. Every location that it's going to turn on has 4 sources. And the only question is, are they all have the same phase alignment? So from these 4 different angles, do I actually get all of them in the same phase? And if I do, I'm going to get this bright spot. Okay, but the truth is, if I did the mathematics, it doesn't work from here. So from these 2 points, they're out of phase. So I'm not getting these 2 at this location. And if I don't get those 2, these 2 don't produce enough light to create a photon here. There's not enough. They are making contributions. It's not enough. And so the point would be is if I eliminate this source of photons, you can't see this pattern. All of these lines go away if I eliminate these 2 sources. So they have to have at least 3 contributions. So let me go to a spot that actually has a dot. So what you need to actually get the photon enough pieces to fall on the location to actually see it, you need it to line up with at least 3 of these lines. And if 3 of them aren't in phase, you won't get a photon. So you have to have at least 3 and ideally 4. So when you have 4 lining up, then you get a very bright spot. So these brightest places are where 4 lines up. Okay, so where 4 of them line up, it came out again, so you don't get confused. This is a dark spot, and so those are the locations. Well, this arrow should be here. Those are the locations where you're going to get the brightest spots, because there's 4 that are in phase, 4 paths that all line up and are in phase. You get a bright spot. If 3 line up, you'll get one of the little fadey ones on the end. And if only 2 line up, you're dead. You have a black spot. Okay, you won't see anything at all. And that perfectly explains this pattern. Alright. Now, I guess I could do a mechanical drawing where I do these all in color or something and I point out the theory, but I'll explain as an added bonus. I'll just explain one more time my theory of a photon, okay, that you don't wish to in any way point out how it can't be true, how there's some evidence that it can't be true. So I argue that a photon is quanta of energy. Alright, I'll just draw it like that so you can see they're not on a perfect line. And this distance between this point and this point, where they can be out of alignment, that's the polarization. And so they can be polarized in different planes of the they can be polarized up and down this way, they can be polarized this way, that is out of alignment. And their alignment has to do with how they're produced. They're produced because electricity goes through a material and it shoots the photons as it goes through. So whatever alignment the atom is at when the electricity hits it is the alignment that the photon will come out, because it's going through atoms. Atom, 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 atom. And as it hits each atom, it produces the little bit. So the little bits are out of alignment because there's distance between the atoms. So that's the simple theory. Oh, that's too bad. That's not visible. So see, yeah, you can see that one. So the atoms are in alignment, The electricity takes time to get through, and as it moves from atom to atom, it shoots a little bit, a little quanta, a little quanta, a little quanta, a little quanta. This will be the frequency, the speed at which this passes through these atoms. So the size of the atoms will essentially decide the frequency. And each little bit will be popped in sequence, and so there'll be a polarization. That is a thickness in atoms. And the average thickness for, say, regular light of 400 or 500 nanometers, let's say just 500, is going to end up being something around 2,000 atoms worth. So it has to travel the thickness of a couple thousand atoms to create the average photon. But anyway, that's how the photon is created, and that's why the photon has polarization. And the polarization is in, like I said, the off direction this way. The phase is this. So the phase is the distance between them, and that phase was decided by the distance essentially between the atoms. So different size atoms produce different colors of light. That'll be the tendency. And so those are the two elements you have, phase and polarization, and you have the ray length. So something regular physics never talks about is how long is this photon? How many of these wavy humps, right, does that count as a photon? Does this count as a photon? Just one of these wavy humps? Do I need 3 of these wavy humps? They never talk about it. But the theory is that it needs 6 quanta. It needs 6 bits of energy. So the idea would be is that, no, you need 6. So you need 6 of these little things for a human eye to see the photon. And the fact is, they'll say there's no photon if it's only 5 or it's 4. Now a frog would say, yes, it is a photon. So they're seeing a whole bunch of energy we don't see. We pretend the energy doesn't exist, but the frog would have told you, yeah, it does. Okay, you're mistaken to think it doesn't exist. All right, so my theory simply is that when the photon is going through the slits, the simple fact is that the average slit width, okay, so that's your slits, the average slit width is actually the same as the polarization of the average photon, the thickness of the photon. And so obviously a photon that came on this line would end up losing some of its bits. One that came on this line, it would lose some. So these actually hit, some portion hit the surface and are destroyed, or consumed. So now your photon is ruined because now you only have 2 bits and they're the wrong distance from each other. And the truth is what happens is each one of these little bits gets shot to a different location. They still have their polarization, like this one comes up here to the end and goes this way. So they're all getting broken first, and then they're getting sent to random locations, depending on what electron they hit. So they're going in all kinds of places. And the simple truth is that in all these locations, in these certain locations where you see light, it's because some bits from here, okay, these bits, and then some bits from here, and then, if you have the double slit, some bits from these other locations, recombine. They have the right phase, and if they have the right phase and you recombine them in the right order and in the right space, that is the right 2,000 atoms worth of space you hit. So there's a little target here of 2,000 atoms. And if these bits all end up hitting that little target, and this one has the 1 and the 2, and this one has the 3, 4, and 5, 6, for a human eye, then that will be seen as a rebuilt photon. And that's the simple truth. So all you're doing is taking a bunch of little bits, okay, and you're just reconstructing the original frequency. So this was from photon A, this was from photon B, C, D, and E, but when you put them all back together again, you get one good photon. And that's the real function. So there is no destructive interference in space. The photons never interact with each other in space. It's all just about breaking and remaking. There is no destructive interference. There's breaking and then reconstruction of a photon out of the pieces. The theory explains the phenomenon, it accounts for the patterns, it accounts for the differences in the pattern, it accounts for the blending of the pattern. It explains the phenomenon with a simple explanation that doesn't require any miraculous events. And again, it is miraculous. They know that if they shoot two laser beams into each other, the photons don't appear to in any way bang into each other or interact. They won't get any interference if they just shoot two lasers at each other, because they know forces don't interact with forces. Gravity force that's pulling on one planet, the gravity force that's pulling on another planet, the two forces don't interact. Their math knows that. They don't sit here and say, you know, at this location I can pretend the two forces have changed the location. No, the forces actually have to get to the object at the speed of light, affect it, and then there has to be an exchange. It has to move at the speed of light. It has to get all the way to the object. Charge works the same way. This is a common and kind of an established fact. I mean, I can't say that conventional physics actually admits it, but force does not interact with force. Force has to get to a piece of matter before there's an interaction. The force is a straight line, as Feynman says. Light travels from point A to B in a straight line unless it hits an electron, and then it's game on in terms of change will take place. The electron's going one way, the photon's going another. That's the force law. That's what all the experiments indicate. And I shouldn't have to have some sort of rude and obnoxious frickin' argument with rational people who want the truth. If you want the truth, here's your simple, rational, logical, mechanical explanation that doesn't require something miraculous to happen, like photons knowing how to do calculus. They don't have to know how to do calculus. They don't have to have radar. They don't have to be God plays dice with the universe. None of that has to be a truth, and you can just understand it's a simple mechanical phenomenon. In the case of water, what is screwing up the waves, right? What changes the wave from a flat wave, okay, to a little round wave? We know it's the friction with the surface. We know the water molecules are sticky, they're stuck to each other, and the ones that are next to the surface end up adhering to the surface a little bit, and they're slowing down. But they're attached to the others, so they just bend. All the others have to also concede to the point, and that's what creates the wave. So we know there's a physical mechanism that makes the round wave. In the case of a photon, there's a physical mechanism that makes the photons go in directions. And the physical mechanism is that nuclear physicists should know that atoms aren't straight lines. Atoms don't create straight surfaces. They create surfaces that have electrons and protons and a bunch of empty space between them. Okay, they know this is the real thing, and that there's free electrons that are still trying to get to the proton that aren't really associated with the atom, but they're attached in the sense that they're floating around close to the surface, that surfaces are covered with electrons. So that, yes, some of the light goes straight through, never hits an electron, but some of the light goes near the surface and it ends up crashing into electrons and it changes their direction. The simple fact is that that's how electrons work. You hit an electron, the electron already has tension with other electrons. It's weakly attached. So you can sort of understand that when you hit it and give it velocity, that attachment means, oh, it's going to move closer to this. See, this line is closer to this electron than that one. See, these are 3 electrons, right? So when you move the electron this way, it gets closer to this other electron, which means there's a force this way, repelling it. And so the electron leaves this way. So it doesn't move in a straight line, and therefore its new place in space is canted from the straight line force here. So the force isn't conveyed in a straight line. So unlike in a material like glass, where all the electrons are lined up, and this one pushes into this one, and this one pushes into this one, this one pushes into this one, and the force can go in a straight line, it doesn't go in a straight line when the electrons are on a surface, because the electron has more freedom to go in this direction. And so that's what's happening here. The electron moves out. Okay, it moves out. It moves in a it doesn't move in the same direction as the force being applied, because the tension the electron is in is going to dictate which way it moves. All right. So, I mean, It's all there. It's a complete explanation. Yeah, I didn't do any fancy mathematics because we should agree on the mathematics. It's just algebra, for frig's sake. It's just basic geometry. You're just saying what, all you're saying is what lines, okay, create the right distance to maintain the phase. What angles, sine thetas, end up creating complementary phase bullets that'll stay in the same phase. And those are the locations where you're going to see the pattern. So you're implying I haven't done my job. I have done the job. All right. I think any one of these arguments in the past I've made should have been reason for you people to have pause, for you people to reflect on how you've decided what the truth is. When you didn't decide on a volume of evidence. The simple truth is it's a fact of historical physics. You just gave up. Feynman is a perfect example. He actually literally says to the audience, well, you could waste your time trying to figure out what the answer is, but us smart people have been thinking about it and we couldn't figure it out, so you don't stand a chance. I mean, that's the attitude of physics, and that was the attitude of physics in the early 1900s. They didn't want to wait for the truth. They were tired of looking and just said, let's pick one and make it God. That's it. They gave up on looking for evolution. They just said, okay, we're either Muslims or Christians. Which one? And they chose to be, that particle wave. And they decided to be Muslims. That's it. Nothing else happened. They copped out. They bailed on science and took a silly compromise. All right. Do the same as with the standard model. If you believe that it's impossible, ask a physicist. I've been asking physicists forever. Who's going to answer the question? Draw me the picture. Show me the picture on Google. Show it. Show waves making the two patterns. You can't do it because you have your waves coming from the wrong place. It's not possible because you don't understand where the photons are being altered, which is at the surface. So you can't get the geometry right. It's impossible to get it right with a bulging wave theory. It gets the locations wrong. All right. A physics student or a high schooler to do it for you by giving them the necessary information. So I have to explain to physics people that you don't have, they already haven't noticed that nobody has the right information. I mean, they haven't noticed that the two-slit experiment isn't what the mathematics shows you to be. I mean, again, how can I ask them to do something they don't know exists as a reality? They haven't conceded the truth. Their math doesn't work. They've bought the lie that their math it perfectly predicts, and it's the reason we have iPhones. They've bought the hype, the lies. They probably still think the detector experiments were actually performed. All right. Anyway, information: slit width, separation of slit screen, slit distance, and height, wavelength, frequencies. Again, these are not the things in dispute. No one's disputing the distance of the target. No one's disputing even the slit widths and different things. I mean, obviously, their mathematics doesn't have. See, their mathematics is so lame. They claim it's so perfect and all. Their math doesn't even have, in the double slit experiment, their math doesn't even contain this width. Okay, the math has this width, the width of this, and the math assumes these outside widths. So you can't even do a variable width experiment. Their math almost dictates that the width of this impediment has to be the width of this slit for their math to work. If you change these outside slits, their math fails. It won't predict the pattern because there's nowhere to put it in the formula. They don't have, their formula is superficial. It's a generalization. It isn't meant to be accurate. It's meant to get a generally okayish answer. And they won't even concede that. All right, perform the double slit experiment. Again, why? It's been done billions of times. Obviously, this image below is quite beautiful. Why would I try to improve upon it? Yeah, I wouldn't. Okay, upload your experiment and results to YouTube and make sure to use an attractive title like "Physicists Have Been Lying to You." Okay, that's what I'll call this video. Alright, so let me just grab that text, and that's exactly what I'll do. If you do 1 through 5 and end up being right, well, I'm already right. so I end up being right, and you're saying that this is the road to proving it. Doing exactly what I've been doing, which is making the arguments that you clearly ignore, that you just don't care to hear. You haven't answered a single one of my questions. I made a video called Questions. Did you comment on that video and answer a single one of the questions? Could you do that? I'll link the video below, question video. Could you answer one of the questions in the video? Okay, if you do 1 through 5, and I believe you would get some serious attention. You can believe it all you want. They're cowards. I have offered, look, I had a contest where you could win $3,000 and nobody was interested. Okay, I've offered physicists, I said, tell me what you want per hour and I'll pay it. They don't show up. They're cowards. That stupid Baldy Cats guy, he leaves the derogatory comments in my video. I completely debunk his bullshit, and what's he do? He runs away. They're cowards. They do not wish to have their garbage interrogated. They do not wish somebody to ask them these simple questions. Why haven't your physics accounted for this? Why are you saying it's the most perfect proven mathematics in the history of mankind when it can't explain a two-slit experiment correctly? All right. Some physicists would probably contact you to perform the experiment. So again, re-performing the experiment doesn't change what we already know. So again, this is the fact that their drawing of wave mechanics does not explain the two-slit experiment. It's a fact. It doesn't explain it. There's absolutely no reason why every physicist right now can't ask him the question, well, doesn't it seem kind of convenient that the single slit creates two waves, but the double slit only creates two waves? That can't make sense, right? If you have a consistent scientific understanding. If Huygens creates two waves in a single slit, why doesn't it create four waves in the double slit? Well, the reason is because that wouldn't make the pattern, and they can't do that because they know it wouldn't work, because they have the waves in the wrong place. Okay. Some serious attention. Some physicists would probably contact you. Again, they're just caught up in their own performance art. Okay, physicists aren't scientists, they're artists. Physicists have no integrity. I've proven it over and over and over again. They like to attack dumbasses and make fools out of them. They find the ripest, rottenest fruit on the tree to make fun of. They don't want any challenge. They don't want their physics challenged. They are cowards. Liars and cowards. Okay, some physicists will probably contact you to perform this experiment, so that's the funny part, with more professional setup. Why? Again, the outcome of the experiment is not in dispute. We're talking about the cause. Just as gravity is not in dispute. The inverse square law, rock solid. The speed of the force being the speed of light, rock solid. Those things aren't in dispute, retard. Your wacky, silly explanations of bent space, that's what's fucking being interrogated. Where's the evidence for anything called a bent space? All right. This status of living, whatever that means, Jesus should then follow shortly after. So again, this is, you're just mocking the point, right? Well, why don't you just mock Nobel Prizes entirely then? Why don't you just mock the whole idea of somebody getting the right answer? Because it doesn't mean anything. He's just Jesus. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not asking you to build statues. I'm just saying that the fact is, if I'm right, I've done something rather incredible, right? I mean, I've done something rather spectacular, not incredible. I think it was perfectly credible, but the fact is, I did what Einstein spent his whole life looking for, the simple answer, and I did it. And it's just because, I had an advantage in the sense I liked straight lines. And I guess Einstein just didn't. He did all those. He got into this whole curvy thing. You know, it's like you got into a little, the little curvy cocaine, and started thinking curves made sense somehow, like things just curve for the hell of it. And once you do that, yeah, physics breaks. Because physics is straight line geometry. The underlying universe is probably made out of frickin' squares. Okay, it's not circles. The little bits. Okay, the real universe is just a bunch of little lines. And they couldn't do that. I mean, they just couldn't separate themselves enough from their gooey perceptions of reality to recognize that everything's just straight lines. That it's, look, they probably couldn't admit they were robots. That everything they're performing, it's art, their function as an individual was just a mechanical inevitability. That they are in fact rolling dice, and dice have inevitable outcomes. It's inevitable. As the dice are leaving the person's hand, it's already been decided what the dice are going to end up as. It's already a physical fact in the sense that it's that predictable, because the mechanics are that rigid. And clearly physics doesn't like that truth, because they wouldn't be running from it so hard. But anyway, look, we already know they got simple things wrong. They hate change, right? They hate to have to change their model. America couldn't even do the metric system. 10 years working at it, and they couldn't do it. And clearly, Benjamin Franklin, just a simple mistake, got plus and minus wrong, and physics never fixed it. Because they just hate having to go back and say, oh, we made a mistake. They hate it. They're so resistant to it, and that's all that's being displayed here. So they don't want their fable. They don't want to have to go back and say, oh, you mean all those stories we told were bullshit? Oh, that's embarrassing. We've been telling 100 years of bullshit stories. Ew. And they're scared to death to admit, oh, I was duped. Ooh, I fell for it. Ooh, that makes me look pretty silly, right? They got a phone call from some guy in Africa. He's got $6 million in the bank, and all he needs is for you to, get him a gift card from the store, and he can get his money, and he'll give you half the $6 million. And you fell for it. Ooh, yeah, you look like a pretty big sucker. Yeah, ooh. That's what they're running from. They don't care about the truth. They care about their reputation and having to admit they're wrong. Alright, enough of a video. So yeah, there's no point. Like I said, I won't get a rational counter argument because it's indestructible, frankly. It's the right answer. Okay, you can pretend it's not, but it is.